Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Build Your Social Media Brand in the Interior Design World, presented by Interiors+Sources. My name is Katie Yale, Editor-in-Chief with Interiors+Sources, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar. Joining me today is Top 25 Content Marketing Expert, Christoph Trapp.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having me and looking forward to speaking with everyone. Looks like people are still joining us, so that's great to see.
So we encourage you to ask questions during the presentation. Please put your questions in the Questions tab. Although you may submit questions at any time, most questions will be answered at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. Should you experience any technical difficulties during this broadcast, please send a message in the Q&A box or contact us at 1-800-553-8878. Again, that number is 1-800-553-8878. You may access a copy of today's presentation slides under the Handouts tab. We are pleased to announce today's webinar is worth one learning unit for continuing education through the AIA. Here you can find both our provider number as well as the course number. Following the webinar, your attendance will be reported to AIA. And as I mentioned, I'm Katie Yale, Editor-in-Chief with INS, and joining me today is Christoph Trapp. So let's begin. And thank you again, Christoph, for joining us today.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me on, Katie. And as you can see, we have our Twitter handles on there. So if you'd like to tweet along, share any thoughts on Twitter, we're always happy to see that. Keep in mind that Katie and I most likely can't respond on Twitter right this second as we're talking with you, but I believe the Interiors+Sources Twitter handle is being monitored. So if there's any questions, and of course, if you have any questions, feel free to share them in the comments on here in the tab on the right, and we're happy to jump into those as well.
Now, Christoph, just to start us off, what is the importance of social media? We're seeing it everywhere today, but what should our listeners understand about what is happening with social media these days?
You know, Katie, what's interesting to me is social media is not a fad at all, right? It's not going away. It's here to stick around. We'll share some numbers later, how common it actually is for people to use. But there are tactics and techniques and things that we want to think about that can help us as an individual and also as a company. And of course, very powerful scenario is where individuals and companies can align their brands. So if you even think about what we're doing, right? We have our own stories, and then we also align that with Interiors+Sources. But let's jump right in. For individuals, right? Personal branding is a big one. And it establishes you as an expert. And the one thing I always find that it's sometimes hard for people to think of themselves as the expert, even when they are, right? There's always something else to learn. There's always something else to do. But the bottom line is people are looking to you guys' expertise. And the only way they can find it is when you share it.
Will you just go into a little bit about personal branding? Because, you know, that's something it's such a new concept, but you know, it's almost like a joke of like, oh, I have to work on my personal brand, but it is so important when you are on social media to present that, especially as, you know, as a professional in this industry.
Yeah. So first of all, everyone has a brand to begin with, right? It's not just because of social media in the last 10, 15 years. It's everybody has a brand already, but it used to be that it was mostly in person. And we're not saying that you shouldn't do in-person things. We do have our own events even where we meet people in person. The Design Connections is coming up in February in Florida. So we care about in-person still as well, and that's important. But of course, with social media and all the different channels that are out there today, it's more and more important to share your expertise, to share what you know, to share your perspective on those different things. And all those stories that you're sharing actually come back to they build your brand in the mind of your audience.
Great. Now, how do companies fit into this? What are the differences and the similarities between individuals and companies?
Yeah, there are some similarities. Of course, there also are some differences. Sometimes individuals, it's easier to actually jump in, right? Because they don't have to go through 15 channels of approval because it's really just them, even though there can be repercussions, positive and negative. I guess a positive outcome isn't necessarily a repercussion, but think about how it can actually help you advance. For companies, you really want to go where your customers are. So if they're congregating on Twitter, make sure you're participating. Make sure you're adding to the conversation. Make sure you're sharing your expertise on there. And it also keeps you top of mind. And this is actually a thing that's becoming harder and harder, right? It used to be they were like a handful of channels. There used to be like print channels, TV, radio, and that kind of wrapped it up a couple decades ago. And today there's so many channels that you really want to try to stay top of mind wherever your customers and potential customers are. And for some organizations, that could be Instagram, could be Twitter, could be a blog, could be Facebook. We'll talk about those things in more detail. But that's really, really important to stay top of mind for when people need your help, that, your company comes to mind at that time. Marketing, of course, is a big one. The marketing landscape continues to shift, and it's becoming the strategies continue to evolve. How you reach people, where do you reach them, how often do you have to get in front of them, when do you get in front of them? Personalization, of course, becomes more and more important. Now you can target people very specifically on the different channels. So marketing, of course, is maybe one of the fastest changing industries out there. And it's no different for interior designers and interior design companies. Brand awareness, of course, is a big one, right? Again, if you're top of mind and people know your brand, that's important. The biggest thing for companies, we should probably put that on for individuals as well, Katie, but for companies especially, they have to be personable. So you can't, I highly recommend not to always write in the third person, talk about yourself in the that's the fourth person, I guess. We're so pleased to announce the share tweet today. Be personable, talk like a person. Not everything is state of the art. Not everyone is the industry leader. Be a person. Just be fun, be human. It shouldn't be so hard to actually appear human. I joke, our digital marketing arm here at interiors+sources and StayMates, the parent company, we joke that we're helping humans appear human again. So it's kind of silly, but it's also true.
But it's also so important because for so long we had this idea that like corporations were this big, like scary thing that nobody was actually allowed to be, like you don't know what's happening behind the curtain. And it is so important now to have companies come back down and say like, no, we really are like a mom and pop shop, or these are the people that we work with. Because even though we're heading more and more towards AI, people don't want to just be surrounded by like electronics, and so the personable aspect is always so important, especially when you're looking at like Instagram, where you can look so perfect all the time, but that's not real life. And we're seeing a lot of personalities come back out and say like, I can't show you just, this picture perfect spot. I need to let you know about the realities of life. So that's especially important.
Right. Of course, we'll talk about how it all fits in with your business goals, but being personable, being a member of your community and the people that they can relate to you, it's really, really important to actually do that. And the way you achieve that is, when I grew up in marketing, 15 years ago or 10 years ago, 20 years ago, what happened is everything had to go through this big approval process, right? 10 people have to approve things. And I lovingly call it approval hell. It gets changed so many times. By the time it gets done, no wonder it doesn't appear human, because, everybody hacked it apart. And so we need a new system. How do you respond quickly? How do you give people who run your brand accounts to actually feel empowered to share information quickly? So if somebody says something, what do they say back? How do they respond? What do they share? Can they be tongue-in-cheek here and there? Of course they can, right? Don't say anything offensive, but that doesn't mean you can't be You can't be fun. You can't be more of a human.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, everybody, all the chief marketing officers I talk to, everybody needs business results. And here's the trick on social media, and we'll dive into that and answer questions as they come up. Social media compounds, right? So when you start doing some of the things we talk about today and tomorrow and on Monday, you call me and you say, Christoph, what are you guys? It didn't work. And I said, we just talked last week. I didn't expect it to work in 2 days. So there's no overnight success. So when you see all these overnight successes, it took them a lot longer to actually get there. And just something to keep in mind. It's one thing on top of another. It's an ongoing campaign, one campaign on top of each other.
I love the saying that's out there that it took years and years of hard work to have overnight success. Because that's like, yeah, you don't just pop up one day.
That is true. So the biggest thing, we kind of hinted on this already a little bit, the biggest things for companies and individuals to think about is social media changes all the time. When I first started doing training around how to do social media strategy, that training was very different from what I talk about today. Now, some of the basics certainly still apply. A good story is still a good story, but the networks change. What works back then might not work today. And 20 years ago, 6 months, that was sometimes the time it took us to just plan. And what you really want to do is have a high-level plan, and we'll share some of those steps on how to get there. You want to have a high-level plan, high-level vision, and then continuously implement. And I'll give you an example. We tried this actually. Instagram TV launched, I don't remember how long ago, 6 months ago maybe even 6 months ago exactly. And we tried Instagram TV, and I haven't seen any success with anybody on Instagram TV. Did you see any success trying that, Katie?
No. I think it's interesting because one of the things was that you had a lot of pop-ups, especially if you had push notifications. I was constantly getting pop-ups, and it was more annoying than anything else. So, but as far as the stories go, rather than Instagram TV, the stories option is something that people can opt in and out of. You don't have to stay through the whole thing. And we're seeing that kind of, building up a better following than other things. So yeah, it some things that we are really excited about. You think it might work. You just don't know until you kind of try it out.
So that is really the key thing here, guys. So what Katie did and the interiors+sources team did, they hopped on the IGTV bandwagon and still don't understand what they were even trying to do. They say the differentiator is you don't have to hold your phone sideways. And that was basically the only thing that was different from any other platform. But the key is to try it right now. Twitter live audio, which I actually have seen some success with, was another thing that launched. You can now do a live audio broadcast on Twitter. It's actually an MP3 file, right? That's the video version of MPs, I think. It's actually a video file, but it's only the audio. And I've seen some success with that. Instagram TV, I haven't seen any success with. And then, Instagram, of course, in the interior design community is a really good network because it's very visual. People search for hashtags. Even if I look at Katie's account, I've been using that as a little bit of a case study. She has a few hundred followers, but there's much more engagement than the followers because of people looking at content through hashtags. So a very, very successful strategy there. But again, be ready for things to change. And, the social media networks, they change things to make more money. So, 10 years ago or 8 years ago, you could just post things and never have to pay. And today you may have to pay to do that. So the trick is to keep going, to get going, and to keep going. And then always share your stories and try new things and see what works and see what doesn't work. The thing that bothers me about that concept, guys, I got to be really honest with you. The other day I had a post take off on LinkedIn, and it had like 4,000 views and I don't know how many likes and comments, but much better than the average post on that account. And so I, of course, tried to go in and figure out what was going on. Why was it taken off? And guess what, Katie? No, I had no idea. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
There was nothing different about that post. It was in the same voice. It was the same length. Didn't even have a picture. I don't remember if it had a hashtag or not, because now you can use hashtag on like every channel out there. But I couldn't even tell you why it worked, so I can't duplicate it in that case. But again, I'm going to keep trying and keep fiddling with it and see if I can duplicate that success.
I think that's important too to look at, is that it's difficult to look at just one or two, which is why it's so great, at least that we've found, that jumping in and doing it as much as possible and really getting into it, it helps your statistics to be able to understand and analyze that information better, because it might be something depending on the platform, it could be the lighting was really great, or this was a day in which everybody was on Instagram because somebody wrote about something that was trending. The more that you have those posts out there that are doing well, the more you can kind of look and say, where are the similarities, where are the differences, and to be able to kind of analyze that better than if you're just wanting to know immediately what the options are.
The other thing that you want to keep in mind is, I grew up in journalism, right? Then went to corporate communication, content marketing, those kind of things. And what happened is, we got scoops back in the day. This is what's something that we should write about. Here's, news releases, whatever. And that model is not completely dead. But what's interesting is today, media companies, bloggers, and there's plenty of bloggers and niche sites out there, including, obviously interiors+sources covers the design industry, but what happens is, reporters monitor what's happening on social media. So you can actually get earned media coverage by sharing your story on social media, and some reporter might just kind of stumble upon it, and they'll tell you they'll stumbled upon it. But what a lot of companies now do, they have artificial intelligence running, and they kind of predict what stories should be covered and what stories should be ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So let's run through some of the social media sites. Katie, you want to run through them?
Yeah, so we have stats on the next page, but these were some of the sites that a lot of our listeners may be acquainted with. Of course, Facebook, where you have your own page and you post your own stuff, but you can also have friends posting. There is a different platform for when you have a community or a company. And especially if you're going with the company aspect, something to bring up, and just so that you're aware, is that you can actually, kind of like Google reviews, you can review your company. And so for some people who may not want to trust the general public with having that ability, that is something to be aware of. Then there's Twitter, which has always been kind of the quick thought of the internet. The hashtag really took off with Twitter because that's how you really were able to kind of bounce through all of these thoughts. But one of the interesting things now is that we're seeing a lot of threads where somebody will start, but I think they're up to 280 characters now, I think. But that's not enough thought, that's not enough space for the thought. So quite often, especially articles that are used in journals and publications and things of that nature that are looking for deeper thoughts while still using the social media aspect, are going towards those types of threads. And so if you have a thought that's longer than 280 characters, definitely look into kind of continuing that thought, and it's a better place for like kind of engagement for those kinds of things. LinkedIn.
Yeah, I actually use I use the thread function quite often, especially when, like the other day, I did a podcast for one of the conferences that we run, and basically what I did is I kind of hacked it up into tweets, and then I kept promoting it, but I also kept sharing things. And I don't remember how many tweets were in the thread, but there, maybe a dozen or 8 or 10, something like that. And then basically I tweet the entire thing at once. And what was interesting to me, I would think that the top tweet performs the best because people see that and then they decide whether or not they even want to see the other tweet. But that's not what happened at all. What happened is the top one performed pretty well, the next one a little less, the next one a little less, and then the numbers started going back up. So what happens is every network now, guys, has algorithms, right? So they don't show you every tweet or every Facebook post or every LinkedIn post, every Instagram, all those different posts on the different networks. What they do is they show them to you in what they think will interest you the most. So more people saw the fifth tweet, and then they could go back and look at the whole thread. So it's something to keep in mind, when you're out there posting things. People might not see everything in the right order, which is, if you have something that should be in an order, a thread, Twitter thread is actually a good way to do that.
And a lot of people kind of think about Twitter as, being this terrible void in which there are a lot of trolls, someone who is actively trying to aggravate other people. And while that is somewhat true, there is a lot of really great reporting, a lot of really great thought pieces that are being put up out there. The people I know in my life who are the most attracted to Twitter tend to be people who are wanting to know about news immediately, very quickly and in depth. So they tend to follow, reporters and politicians. My best friend is a lawyer for social issues, and really Twitter's what she uses. Her companies are always trying to get news out as quickly as possible, and Twitter is the way to do that. Then LinkedIn is kind of the professional Facebook. A lot of people have it, may not use it as much for kind of posting and things of that nature. When it first started, a lot of people were using it to kind of put their resume up and to look for other jobs and to network and things of that nature. But there are a lot of new ways of using LinkedIn, which are really great. Posting straight to the page instead of putting a link, we are finding works out really well. It gets our ideas out really quickly, especially with things like editorials that we are really passionate about and we think it has good information. Those are the ones that we're finding people really want to read more about. People who are on LinkedIn tend to be professionals who do want to read deeper into subjects having to do with the workplace. Instagram is probably the one I know the most about. It is somewhat like a Twitter with just pictures, with a lot more pictures. It's beautiful pictures. It tends to be the one that in the design industry is particularly great for getting some ideas out there, because you can show your photos of a product or of a space that you've designed. There are also lots of, being able to put up pictures of yourself with other people that you love or enjoy. Or one of the problems, though, with Instagram is that there isn't a link function within the comments. There is a bio link that you can use. So in the little paragraph about who you are, you can have a bio. But if you're changing every day and you want people to be linked back to something, Instagram is a little bit more difficult to be able to do that. Snapchat is one of the fastest growing, particularly with Gen Z, which are those who are, I believe, the cutoff age is about 19 or 20. But interestingly, since Snapchat redesigned probably about almost a year ago now, a lot more news organizations and other large types of organizations that you wouldn't think would want 15-second snaps. You take a photo, you're able to share it with friends, it disappears either immediately or after 24 hours. Mostly it's used to, send silly selfies and things like that. But what we're seeing now is that there actually is a channel on Snapchat. So Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the Dodo, who all about animals. All of those kinds of publications now have a page on Snapchat in which they are giving you really quick bits of information. And if you're interested, there is the ability to go into the longer article. This is interesting because instead of having someone open up a page on the computer and read a paragraph or two and then go, I don't want this information, and closing it, the people who get to that point and they actually open up the article are going to want to read the entire article. Pinterest is a place where you can save photo-based links to other you can keep links to other websites.
Yeah,
we
so
find that
you know what I love about
great.
Right, it's so visual, right? And especially like in this industry, and also like anything that people try to make themselves at home, including dinners. That's a good place to go, but it's so visual. And the reason I like Pinterest is because what you do on Pinterest is you're really just linking from another site. So as Katie is moving through the list here, and we'll get to blogs, maybe I'll jump ahead to blogs for a second, is you share your content on a website, right? And that is important to do because, yes, this is about social media. Yes, we want you to do social media. Building your house only on social media is really building your house on rented land. So what we want you to do actually is build it on your own land. So, for example, your website, your blog, whatever it might be, and then take all that content and basically atomize it. That's the official term. You can think of it as you're hacking it up, and you're using it on all these different channels, including Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. And then sometimes you link back, sometimes you don't. On Pinterest, of course, you always link back because that's kind of the setup of that network. But that's how they all fit together. And then, of course, the next one, if you want to jump back in, Katie, is YouTube.
And some of these last ones here, basically Pinterest, YouTube, podcast, blogs, and vlogs. One of the things about those is that they have more long-term, like Christoph said, but Pinterest, you may not get a ton of views right away, but there'll be continuous flow because people look back at things that have been pinned for me, I've been pinning for, since they started, and I can go back and still see some of those articles. YouTube is the video site where you can upload videos of your own. You can watch other people's videos, and it is also trying to follow in the footpath of like Netflix and Hulu in creating its own web channel. So we will be seeing more publications, more typical television channels using YouTube as a means of getting their information out there. Podcasts
and what's interesting about YouTube, Katie, is so it is still the second biggest search engine on the net, right? So it is owned by Google. But Google, of course, is the number one search engine. And YouTube, if you have a good video and people search for that information, especially how to solve a problem, how to do a certain thing, how did you do something new, it's a really good place to rank high, not just on YouTube proper, but also on Google, because of the two are linked. And as you probably know, Facebook owns Instagram. Those are linked as well. We do have a question from the audience here quickly, and the question is, I've heard that posting regularly is beneficial, but what is a good rule of thumb? Is it different for different sites? So that question, thank you for sending that over. And if you have any other questions, feel free to send them our way, and we'll try to answer them within context here. What's interesting is that question used to be a lot simpler to answer than it is today. 5 years ago, I would say, I had specific answers. On Twitter, you can post every 15 minutes, and it won't negatively affect you. Today, you don't necessarily have to do that quite as often, but if you post every hour on Twitter, that's actually a good goal. Don't necessarily be overwhelmed by that today, even if you only post 3 to 4 times in a day. That's a good start, but you can go as high as once an hour. Facebook, I wouldn't go quite as high. at all for organic. On Facebook, what we have seen is it's really, you have to spend money to get in front of people. And so you could post once a day, make sure it's high quality content, make sure you thought it through really well, and then promote it to your target audience. So you determine who you actually want it to be, you want the post to be seen by. You can target by job description, geography, all those different things. And there's other keywords you can use as well. So you really want to spend money on Facebook to be successful. Instagram, hashtags currently still work very well. So if you have good hashtags, we talked about how Katie does that earlier. People find your content, also the use of Instagram stories. But I would say, if you're shooting for a couple times a day, 3 times a day, maybe on Instagram, that's not a bad goal. Doesn't mean you have to hit it every day, but really a good goal. LinkedIn, I wouldn't go more than once a day. Certainly, same thing here. You can try hashtags. They did roll them out a while ago. Nobody used them. Now they made it easier to use them. I still haven't seen much success with hashtags on LinkedIn, but it seems like that's one of their goals. So maybe it'll become easier. Maybe it'll help you. So if you can hit that sweet spot when that actually happens, that's actually really good. YouTube, of course, you can put really quick videos on there, but video production does take longer. So, as you can get them done. But if you're uploading a video a week, that's probably quite a bit. Some of the rock star video producers that I see out there, they often do a lot less. Casey Neistat, if you're not familiar with him, with his work, he did a YouTube channel. He grew it to, I want to say 5 million viewers. And he basically just told stories of his travel life and his life in New York City. And he showed these great drone videos and all these different things, and like sunrises and sunsets and whatnot. And he posted like a 10-minute video every day. I think he did nothing else probably other than shoot the video and then edit it and get it up. Of course, one of his companies was bought by somebody. I don't remember who it was, but so it did work out for him, but that's not something I would expect most people to do. Podcast at Interiors+Sources. If you haven't checked out the podcast, they're on the homepage. There's a podcast tab. Hopefully you can check them out, but we're shooting for one a week, one podcast a week. You could probably do more. The other thing to keep in mind, if you prefer to talk as opposed to write, podcasts are a very good way to stay in front of people, as opposed to writing articles or writing posts all the time, because it's relatively easy to record as long as you know what you want to talk about, and maybe you bring a guest on or something like that. And the tools are there's so many tools out there that make it easy. There's iPhone apps that we use when we're at conferences, for example. There's tools that we can use if people are remote. So it's relatively cost effective to do, and the tools are just fantastic. Blogs, I used to say once a week, and I stick by that today. So once a week is actually not a bad number to shoot for. And when we talk about a blog post, we're talking about something that answers your audience's questions, something that is helpful, something that's informational, like a good story. So it can't just be self-promotional too much. Certainly you can have calls to action in there to be hired or to get contacted by the readers for your services, or if you're selling something, you can certainly do that, but make sure it's informational. And we're talking 500 to 1,000 words. So you may remember years ago, people said everything should be short on the web. And that is partially true because social media posts are shorter. And then people would say, well, people have a short attention span. And that's fine. People do have a short attention span, me too. But it doesn't mean that everything has to be short. What it actually means is that every 9 seconds, you have to re-earn your audience's trust. So if you're actually analyzing what Katie and I are doing, right, our voices go up, or we have something else, we have a new slide, or hey, Katie, what do you think, right? We're going back and forth. So every 9 seconds, even though we don't do it necessarily, we're not thinking about it as much, but every 9 seconds we have to re-earn your trust or re-earn your attention. And same thing on the web. So blogs should be that long. Unfortunately, I have to say there's now studies out there that say 4 articles a month are not enough. The ones that perform the best are the ones that write 16 articles a month. I don't necessarily agree that you need to write that much, but you probably want to share things at least once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And then vlogs, Katie. What's a vlog?
So a vlog is a mix of YouTube, podcasts, and blogs. So it is basically an everyday, down-to-earth, like right now, especially when it comes to like makeup tutorials. You've probably heard about those. Especially Gen Z are really into these vlogs where it's a short video about something that you would blog about. But instead of just writing and then having a picture or just speaking about it like a podcast, you are creating a short video, usually an informational video, or potentially, putting together clips of, travels or things of that nature. But they really are great for quick information that needs to have more than a static photo or just your voice to explain what it is.
And you know what's funny about that term, quite frankly, in my opinion, at some point somebody made that up, right? They said, okay, now we have blogs, video, started with a V, so let's do a vlog. So what's nice about that is if you have another way to share your story or get in front of people, do it. Try it. Mm-hmm. That's what's so beautiful about it. If you're not comfortable with video or you don't like to write as much, maybe there's a different way to share your story and get in front of people. Maybe, the sky is the limit, so to speak. So what we did, this hour is actually moving by a lot faster than I had anticipated. Yeah. So we are having so much fun. We're not going to go through this whole slide here, but we'll share that, of course, with you later on. Basically, what it says is everybody is using social media. Just a question of where they are at any certain amount of time. And YouTube, Facebook are still the top ones for adults. And, it's a little different for children, or not children, but 18 to 24-year-olds, showing my age here. But bottom line is people use social media.
And that page can really be used well with this. But when you go through the PDF again and you're looking at the next slide, who is your target audience, what are your primary goals and long-term goals, that page will be available so that you can kind of go through and see the stats for who your target audience is and then how you should be aligning these goals.
Yep. So what's really good about this slide, as you're thinking about how you move forward, number one, everything when we create a strategy, who is your target audience? Who are you trying to reach? What do you know about them? Some people call that you're creating personas. Sometimes that's very threatening to think about that. That is actually, that is a process that you could go through and you can actually create a persona. One of my favorite personas of all times actually came out from a healthcare client. And what happened is they have this persona. Susan is the daughter of the mom who may or may not have to go into get help, staying at home health care. And so what the team did is all the content they created, it was around Susan because they wanted to influence Susan. So they would say things to each other like, I don't think Susan would care about that. Or they would say, oh yeah, Susan would care about that. Or, that's really interesting to Susan. So think about who are you trying to reach? What do you know about them? If it helps, give them a name. If you have a team, you can actually have a discussion like that. And then the next step is you want to think about your goals. What are you trying to accomplish? And I know everybody will say, oh, more business. And that's fine. These strategies actually do help you get more business, but you also want to grow the brand awareness, the reach, Are people even engaging with you? Are people searching for you? Are people finding, are people finding your site as they're searching for you? Are you coming up on Twitter? So the other thing that's interesting with Twitter now, and I think LinkedIn too, and you can even try this if you search for me right now, is my social media accounts show up first. In fact, I think my latest tweets show up that on the front page of my Google search. So if you did search for me, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with all you. Just make sure you let me know you listen to the webinar. But that's another reason why it's important to have a good social media following. So when somebody searches, if you're the CEO or if you're the you have a public-facing personal brand, make sure you have all that going, because it'll actually show up in search when people search for you, when people search for your company. So there's another reason why social media is not just about social, but also about being found in search.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So that's a worksheet you can work through if you like. If you have any questions, feel free to send them over either on here or Twitter, or we'll share our email later on. The workflow, and this is what we think about. How do we all get all this done, right? How do we actually work together? So number one is the workflow. The quicker you can get things published, the better it is for everybody. So when I first started in even print journalism and then marketing, workflows took forever. Like there were all these people involved, everybody wanted to approve the next word in the sentence. And really what you want to do is optimize your workflow. So the quicker you can get to publishing, the better it is. The fewer people have veto power or approval power or changing power, the better. That doesn't mean you shouldn't work together. You should. I encourage you to collaborate in your companies and your organizations. However, you also want to get things done. And the longer the production takes, the less time you have to focus on other things. Staffing. Think about who has access to your accounts, who actually is the person writing the content, who actually edits it. How do we decide? Do they know? Sometimes we hear people say, oh, the interns can do it. And sometimes they can. But if you have something fairly complex, maybe they're not the right person to do it, right? Maybe somebody else is. I actually know some CEOs who do their own social, right? They post all their own stuff, and it is actually them. And others, they have staff help with it. But think about who does it. How do you fit it in? Doesn't mean you have to do it nonstop. And then the next thing is there's plenty of tools out there that can actually help you make the process easier. Just a few come to mind. We have no partnership with Hootsuite, for example, but Hootsuite is a big name out there that helps you automate some of the postings. Sometimes people claim when you post things that's not authentic. I highly disagree. There's still my own thoughts. There's still my own stories, right? I'm just time delaying them, because if I post everything the second it comes to mind, or the second it gets approved by other people, it would all go out at the same time. So that doesn't work. So figure out what are the right tools that you can use as a company. Some are free, some are highly expensive. So you want to kind of strike that balance and see what might work.
I think, so with this one also, something that I have had to remind people of is that, especially the workflow and the staffing, is about relinquishing control and trusting your team. I personally, as editor-in-chief, cannot go through every single thing that's posted, but I trust my team. And that can be very hard, especially if you're like type A like I am. And it's the exact same thing with tools. Sometimes tools screw up, and it's okay. That doesn't have to be perfect when it goes out. If there's a mistake, for the most part, your audience understands. But that's probably the hardest part with this one, is to kind of relinquish control and just understand that, like, it's going to be okay, and you have to trust these things to be able to get the job done.
The other tool I like very much is, especially, if you use Instagram as your primary network, there's a tool called If This Then That. and it allows you to set up certain rules, and it's like endless of what you can come up with, I think, or what they've come up with. But one of my favorites, they call them recipes, is that, I think they call them recipes. So one of my favorite recipes is that when I post a picture to Instagram, that same picture also gets pushed to Twitter natively. So not just the link, but you can actually see the picture on Twitter. So if you're trying to focus on those two networks, but primarily on Instagram, that's a very nice way to still get stuff pushed to Twitter without even having to go to Twitter. I would still recommend to turn the notifications on. So if somebody's talking to you, you actually see it. My recommendation on once people start talking to you, I always like to respond at least once. If they turn out to be a troll, you can certainly block them or mute them if you don't want to block people. But I always recommend to at least chime in once.
Mm-hmm. So with best practices, so for all three of these, reach, visibility, and conversion, I pulled up some examples to be able to show. So Christoph's going to go into them a little bit, but this one here is a good example of social media shares and engagement. As you can see, that it was liked by 215 people, and there were 15 comments. The thing about this that is so, we hear so often like 10,000 views, and millions of views. But this is from the Black Artists and Designers Guild. They actually just launched. So they went from, as I was going through their feed, they went from 3 or 4 likes to within just a week or two, all the way up to 214. So it's not about having the biggest number, but seeing what kind of jumps you can make.
So this is the best practice for one of the goals that we always recommend people go after, and that's reach. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get as many people that are relevant to you to read your content. So one thing to think about is when people say, oh, we need 3 million people to read the content. And I'm like, are there 3 million people in the interior design industry? And I don't know the answer, honestly, but it's something to keep top of mind. What's actually a good number? You don't want to compare yourself to a totally different industry, but you do want to think about, who you're trying to reach, why you're trying to reach them, and reach is a good goal to actually do that. And the thing that always to keep in mind here, how to do that is interest, widest, the topic is of interest to the widest audience in your overall audience, right? So sometimes those are general stories, not too technical, not too specific, but something most everybody cares about. And then, of course, use keywords based on search volume. That's mostly for the website, but of course, if nobody is searching for that content, why will anybody read it? Evergreen content is really good. I would highly recommend to be less newsy and more topical. And especially now with algorithms on social media, you never know when somebody sees your article. The other day, it was on a Sunday, and I saw somebody's post from the Tuesday before. So it's really something you want to be aware of, that concept can help. The next goal, and then Katie can jump into the example here, is visibility. And this is actually, you want to start on your website and have things housed there. Please reuse them on social, atomize them, hack them up, create ones, publish everywhere as your official name. But if you have it on your website, now you can rank for it. Now other people can share it. And it's really, really helpful to build it on your own land, not just rented land. Some things that work well is some types of news stories, highly unique angles, fear of missing out, answering questions that people search for. And again, of course, the keyword research in that example is always important as well.
Yeah, so this is an example of an article that we recently posted online. And then one of the important things when we redid our website was to make sure that we had an easy way for people to share our stories on their social media platforms, because the more that you get people to share, the more that their friends or followers, whatever the term may be, will also see it and also share it. and that will increase your viewership. That'll increase visibility and the potential for having either clients or followers from those shares.
And, just between the two of us here, the shares, it doesn't show the shares until there's been a number of shares. So there's never 0 shares listed. Okay, a quick question here before we jump into conversion. So the question from the audience is, when you suggest to promote yourself through paid posts on Facebook, how often do you recommend doing this? Do you just do this at first to build a following? So it really depends on your goals. So I've actually, when I was looking for a job a few years ago, I actually ran an ad on Facebook, right, so to speak, trying to reach recruiters in certain industries. So it all depends on what your goal is. Just building a following no longer is enough, because Facebook doesn't even show your post to your followers, for example. So it is actually important to continuously do that depending on what your goal is. Of course, some, especially personal brands, how much money do they have that they want to spend? Companies probably have some more money, some more funds that can be allocated here, but it is important to continuously do that based on your goals. I know we're going to run out of time, guys. It's been so much fun already, and we only have about 6 minutes left. Really quickly, the conversion goal means we want people to do something. And the whole getting people to do things is becoming harder and harder and harder. But for example, we want you to sign up for a webinar, or we want you to buy something, or we want you to hire us, or whatever it might be. The trick with this kind of content, yes, you need to have the call to action. Yes, you need to make it easy. You see the calls to action on Facebook, for example. Twitter lets you do Twitter cards where it has a call to action to entice you to click. But this content has to be even more educational and informational than other content, because, people are paying less and less attention to highly marketed content. So be informational, educational, really content marketing kind of style, and make sure you share that content in a way that's relevant to your audience. So the posting strategy, we talked about that briefly. These are really the different eras that we've gone through. There used to be the organic era. It's largely gone. It still exists on Twitter and Instagram to an extent. Facebook and LinkedIn are probably the worst, where you can reach the fewest amount of people organic only. But this used to be, I post something, and if I had 70,000 followers or whatever many, you can actually drive a lot of impact. Currently, we are in the paid era, and what that means is you really have to pay to get in front of people. It doesn't have to be much. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were trying to reach a very targeted, geographically limited audience, and they spend $25, and they reach like 1,500 potential clients. So it's actually not that expensive if you think about it, but there has to be some kind of funds have to be allocated for the syndication in this era. Now, nothing in life is as linear as I like it to be. This graphic is left to right, of course, but the audience era is also happening already and really has kind of intersected with the organic era as well. And what that means is that you want your audience members to share your content, and they do that when it's highly relevant, when it speaks to them. Give them a reason to share it. Maybe ask them to share it sometimes, depending on what the example is. But I've seen social media take off for companies, even when they don't do anything, but they get everybody else to share it. So that is actually a viable strategy. And if you post on your company account, likely you will have to pay something to get it in front of people. So that's another way to do it. Really quickly, I know we only have a couple minutes. Katie, you put together a couple more great examples to share, right?
Yeah, so the thing about these examples, particularly since in the design industry, those visuals are very important. I wanted to show you these three because they are beautiful images, but you also see that they aren't the same thing over and over again. They have a nice mix of different types of visuals, of inspiration, products that were made, things that they're doing, people in their lives. So to kind of give this idea of having, we're all multifaceted types of individuals, to show all of those aspects rather than, we're a manufacturer, this is what we manufacture. Well, who's manufacturing and who are the clients and what is the process? Showing a variety to really give your entire story is really important.
Yep. Right. Great. Now look at us being right on time. We did jump into the questions as they were coming in. If there's any others, we would be happy to take them. There's also our email addresses if you'd like to drop us an email if you didn't want to ask your question or think of it later. Of course, we'll send out the deck and the recording, so you are more than welcome to watch it again or send us questions later if there are none now. Great. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We certainly appreciate it. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.